I'm happy to receive you here in this Nuggets of Wisdom series that CTC is offering. The Nuggets of Wisdom is a conversation with different friends of the transition movement, the ecological ecosystem of regeneration. And I'm happy to receive today with us Sophy Banks, one of our elders in inner transition and transition movement. And I can say that oh, yeah, my dog is barking. It's too much? No, it's okay. We flow with life. So Sophie is an eclectic life, has been guided by an overaching question: what helps human to create healthy, joyful, life-affirming ways of being, and why do we so often not, even when we really mean to? Sophie has looked for answers.
That's quite loud.
I will move, okay? Yeah. Um, Sorry for that. So, you have been looking for answers in the world, in different places: grassroots football, ecotherapy, wisdom, traditions, social movements, and more. Each area of practice have shown a new way of understanding, embodying and shaping how systems work. And from 2006, Sophie has been one of the architects of the transition movement, inviting community scale responses to multiple crises. And you have held a focus of integrating inner perspective and reflecting on internal dynamics, such as widespread burnout. You have founded the Heart and Soul Group in Totnes, as well as transition training, leading workshops in 4 continents and inspiring a generation of leaders. And today, you have focused in 2 areas which feel vital in these times: creating practices of shared grief tending and exploring healthy human culture, culminating like this your life journey so far.
Mm.
So you're super welcome, querida. Here is an honor to receive you. Um, and I feel also inspired and privileged to follow the path of inner, one of the works that you have built. And yeah, this moment is just to reflect and share a little bit of what is tending grief together. So, if you want to share a bit how you are today, what is alive in you, and to guide us in thinking about the wide range of cultures and friends who could watch this conversation, how could we explain or define this tending grief? What means to tend grief?
Hmm. Thank you, Anahi. Also, feeling very honoured to be here. Always feels very sweet to connect back with transition that I left about 10 years ago. I'm really delighted that inner transition is still being carried like maybe not a flame, but a flowing river, and it's flowing through people like you. So I'm also honoured to be with you. Thank you for all
Mhm,
that you're still carrying and weaving into the movement.
mhm,
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I was already doing some grief tending work when I was in transition. So once a year, I would help a bit or go to help a weekend that a friend of mine would run in Devon. And every year I would go meaning to assist. And I would be so exhausted that I would just, go through the door and fall down with my own grief. So it was one of the threads that was already moving strongly in me. And I ended up kind of being a carrier of that work. I don't feel it's mine, but I feel like I have elders behind me, Sabomfu and Malodoma Some from the Dagra people in Burkina Faso, who brought grief tending and ceremony to the West, seeing how much destruction is happening in the West because we don't have regular grief tending shared practices. And then Joanna Macy, who of activism activism industry, but also weaving Buddhism and life sciences understandings. So they're the kind of two big lineages that I held, but others as well. So what is it to tend grief? For me, part of it is what it's not doing. So what I learned to do with grief is to put it away, to distract myself, to be busy, to eat sugar or, soothe the feelings. Um, in the modern world, we do some really problematic things of medicating grief, take antidepressants or all of which are helpful. Or even pathologizing, making people wrong who are feeling intense feelings. That's too much. You're too much. So for me, tending grief is where instead of turning away or pushing it away, we put it in the center and we create a space that has enough support and holding and beauty and connection and calling in wider support from other beyond human um, energies or sources. And we really intentionally create a space where grief can move through our bodies. So it's not a burden, it's not something that's exhausting us. And this natural response that human beings have when we see harm that is going on outside, when we experience harm or hurt ourselves, when there's difficulty or conflict or pain in our relationships, we give it a space to move through us, held in all of the beauty and ceremony and song and connection and loving space. And when that happens, I think something that's really magical happens, which is this grief that we've been trying to, manage or put somewhere else becomes a thing of beauty in itself. It reminds us of part of who we are as humans, that grief is part of life as much as joy is part of life. And it deeply reconnects us, Brené Brown talks about intimacy only coming when we feel vulnerable. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that happens when we hold shared grief tending spaces is an immense amount of love and respect and care for each other shows up in the room. And we feel
Mm-hmm.
strengthened and supported and deeply connected back to myself, to others, and to life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's a summary of, anyway,
Thank
some
you.
ideas. Yeah.
And thinking that many of us are not English mother tongue speakers, can we find some concepts that define the word grief? Um,
Mm,
what is when we speak about grief? And then we can also move deeper in the different ways of cultures
definitely.
that.
Oh, I lost
Okay.
you. And
The
oh,
mm-hmm,
that's,
mm-hmm,
yeah. Yeah, language is a really big thing, isn't it? If we don't have a word for feelings, can we feel
mm-hmm,
it? So, we do two things often in grief spaces. One is to widen the doorway of welcome by naming the feelings that we welcome. So, grief is not just sorrow in English or sadness, not just our tears, but also our anger, our outrage at what is happening, our
mm-hmm,
disgust. But also our fear, what contracts us, what shuts us
mm-hmm,
down, but also my own guilt for what I'm responsible for the hurt that I cause to others, the harm that I do, the numbness itself, the resistance, all of the feelings that are difficult or painful. And sometimes I
mm-hmm,
don't even know what it is. Sometimes I say grief is just life force energy that wants to move through my body. I don't
mm-hmm,
have to give it a name, but when I see something and my body responds, or my emotional self responds? Can I let it through and find an expression through movement, through sound, maybe through words, through image, through poetry, through song, through, some other means?
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, a big wide doorway, and sometimes the joy and the grief are very close, or the love and the loss are very close, or the fear and the courage. So those
Hmm.
things are also welcome.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, because we grieve sometimes the loss of someone in a relationship, or because of death, or we grieve the death of a project or a relationship of friends. Um, and we also grieve species in the planet, or we grieve when we were young, or we grieve before being a mother.
Mm,
We grieve so many things. So the way we relate with this pain, letting go, allowing death to happen within us, is always different according to the time of life, the culture, the age, the moment, the context. So I understand that our Western culture somehow blocked uncomfortable feelings, so we were not able to grieve. And what happened, Sophie, in your experience, when we live our lives kind of not knowing, because no one teach us this, or no one show us this is possible? What happened when we carry on the non-grief
mm,
times through life?
mm, mm. For me, what I see is that either we make grief into something beautiful and a medicine and something that weaves community and relationships back together, or grief becomes something problematic, something that can be harmful. So either I can turn it into myself, I turn my anger on myself, I carry a burden of sorrow that I haven't been able to express and move through. And there are people who are writing about how untended grief or rage, its different forms, can become physical symptoms, illness, or mental health conditions. But another thing I might do is to put it out into someone else's body, and I think it's an interesting way of looking at, patriarchy, colonialism, systems of harm, where those with more power can actually, it's not just about extracting resources or taking power. It can also be about, I'm going to put
Mm,
my unwanted feelings into your body. You know,
mm,
England is going to dump its feelings of scarcity into some part of Africa, or, So I think it's really interesting to look at some of those systemic oppression
mm,
dynamics as relating to how we manage pain when we've lost the capacity to manage it in our own culture.
mhm,
So, and
mhm,
then there's, a
mm,
whole colonial
mm,
history was very explicit in destroying, ceremony, destroying healing cultures, healing technologies, destroying the ceremonies and rituals that would have enabled people to metabolize shock and pain. So,
mhm,
then you have cultures that are being shocked, and the destruction of the healing technologies that would have enabled them to recover. And of course, recovery has happened, and many places those are being restored. And I feel like in Europe, there are some tiny threads,
mm,
and we're in this complicated position of trying to learn from cultures and teachers like Sobonfu and Malidoma who want the West to stop doing so much harm in Africa, in Burkina Faso, in their place, but also to ourselves, to restore this life-giving part of community, part of how to live together well.
mhm,
So, issues around cultural appropriation are tricky, and we need to be really thoughtful about how we're respecting. And for me, how my intention, if I'm bringing grief tending, is in alignment with the intention of my teachers. So for me, tending grief is not just about helping, Europeans or white people or people to feel comfortable again. But actually,
Yeah.
when we tend grief together and we bring all the different sources of grief together, we see how much pain in the world is caused by systemic oppression, how much destruction is caused by systems like capitalism, extractive, non-reciprocal
Mhm.
systems that take and export their toxic
Mhm.
chemicals, but also toxic feelings. So for me, that's
Mhm.
what grief tending helps us to do: wake up to the landscape of pain, historic, present, ongoing. uh,
Yeah.
and as Joanna Macy said, when we together, we need to come together and not face into it on our own. It's too big. But when we come together and we have a structure that allows us to honor our pain for the world, something shifts in us. We get this seeing with new eyes, and we go out from the spaces where that's happened feeling more
Mhm.
connected to life, more willing to take a stand for life, more willing to feel our interdependence with each other
Mhm.
as humans, but also with the whole web of life. We're not separate from the condition
Mhm.
of the soil or the air, of course. And many people
Mhm.
listening will know all of this. But yeah.
Yeah. It resonates so much, and it's very interesting the way you frame it as like the new systemic way of seeing the world and understanding the world. That my pain is not only mine, that I belong to a system, a culture, a society, and many times the pain that I feel in my body is not really mine. It's like a cultural response to a systemic oppression.
Mm,
And when we work in these international organizations, and I can say it from my side that I am a woman from the north working with the inner, there are like three different positions or roles in the system that had carry pain on ages somehow. So I experienced that, and the learning on how to identify the boundary between what is mine, what is systemic, what is a history pain, and the sometimes also when I met Joanna Macy's work was like the act of love of offering myself somehow to allow grief to go through me without identification. Like there is a flavor that I feel when I distinguish when it's my pain and my history and when I am feeling collective pain. And
mm,
it's very different, but at the same time it's pain or grief. And I feel this is something that we have not learned in schools or at home, and is a service of love. And this is can be a contradiction, and how not to go into victimization or masochism of allowing me to feel the pain in service of the healing of world somehow of the earth, and how to dance these boundaries somehow.
mm,
um, when put the limit of enough is not mine, I cannot hold, and when I just let it go through my system.
mm,
um, and also you touch this thing that I feel is so important, because one thing is to learn how to grieve personally, and the other is why doing it together. You
mm,
mentioned Joanna Macy's structure. What is the difference in your experience of learning myself to feel anger, pain, fear, then how to communicate it to myself and others, and then to feel it together? There are different like steps in the process of allowing grief to happen. What can you share in your experience of this?
mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just want to really honor what you're speaking to about what's mine and what's collective and what's historic, and how intertwined they are. You know,
mm,
My experiences as a woman in patriarchy, it's like, is that how much is that mine and how much is that my ancestors? And I'm with you. Sometimes I just don't know.
mm,
Um, for me, uh, I've worked as a therapist, so this European technology of tending pain in a one-to-one paid context, um, and it feels very different when we come together in a group. And part of, we talk about two wings of the bird that I hear you sort of pointing to. One is what holds me in life. So the wing of praise, of joy, of beauty, connection, what anchors me. I want to show up. Life is good. And then the wing of grief, what is hard, painful, sometimes overwhelming, what might make me pull back from life because it can feel too much. It's too hard to look at. So this feeling that for me is one of the really key teachings, that we need to strengthen both wings if we want to be fully alive. And if
mm,
we just focus on the joy, we get into a bit of spiritual bypass. If we just want love and light, we'll often have some kind of spiritual burnout at some point. And some people are very identified. I think that's been my role a bit, to be identified with grief and pain. And actually, we need to not get stuck there either. We need to keep noticing there is beauty, there is connection, there is joy. So, we can be fully in grief, but then let's be fully in joy, or keep some balance
mm,
between the two as a practice of staying well.
mhm,
And then we talk about the banks of the river. This is another image that we use, what holds and supports us when we create space for grief to flow. With that idea, like, we love water images in grief, isn't it? So beautiful to feel grief. It just wants to flow downhill. It's not effort. It just wants to move. And when it moves, it serves life and it brings life. So the banks of the river are the things we call in to hold and support us. And when we tend grief together, if you and I are in circle, you're the banks of the river for me, and I'm the
mhm,
banks of the river for you. And part of
mm,
what's beautiful and feels strengthening is how quickly we can move from I'm at the one grieving, fallen down, overwhelmed, really depth of my sorrow, and 5 minutes later, I'm there and I've got your back and I'm holding you. And in 10 minutes, maybe it's my turn again and there's
mm,
something for me that restores the both and, that we're not just the therapist or the broken one. We're both all the time. And
mm,
of course, we do that in our friendships and, in our families and relationships and hopefully in our workplaces. But
mm,
there's something about how explicit that is that I think is really strengthening for people, and especially people that have often been identified as the oversensitive one, that have got a bit of a role about carrying pain. It's like, no, your heart is needed to hold others. We need your strength and your capacity for love
mm,
to be there as well. And for me, that's a kind of, we're unprivatizing grief. We're taking it out of a transactional thing and putting it more in a community context. At the moment, of course, it's in little niches of workshop spaces. More and more people are trying to create peer-to-peer spaces for grief, where we do just hold each other. And there's a lot of experimenting in the circles that I'm in. And of course, there are still living traditions where that happens in community
mm,
spaces, and honouring and celebrating that they're still going in many places. Like you, I
mhm,
didn't grow up with that. That isn't what we did in my family, in my school, in my
mm,
training, in the workplaces I was in. Even
mhm,
when we were meeting painful things, we just
mm,
had to, isn't it, this idea that we cut off below, we cut off our heart, we just show up in our
mm,
head. How
mhm,
problematic that is.
mhm. Yeah.
What would happen if all the corporations had a grief tending for all the damage they've done? If the
Mhm,
staff could feel all of the
mhm,
their own horrible
mm,
work practices that they have to endure, what would happen if the places where the
mm,
pain is felt and the people making these decisions, if they were connected back, could people carry on inflicting that on each other?
mm,
Maybe,
mhm.
but maybe not.
You're touching so many important, beautiful, and interesting threads, Sophie. Like, I could go like you for in different directions.
Yeah.
For example, something I like to share is when I arrived to this region in the south of Chile that is full of native trees and native forest. The first Temazcal I went, this Inipi ceremony that is not traditional from here, is from the north, but I found myself asking forgiveness of the trees that my grandfather cut
Mm,
as a Spanish colonizer. And just this, I think, is happened so many times in so many places, like somehow carrying the guilt of our ancestors. Um, and I believe that the action of consciousness, of saying I'm sorry, and in a circle with a fire, in a ceremony, it brings health,
mm,
healing. It brings like some energetic move in the web of life is listening, even though
mm,
beyond time. Um, and for me, for example, I remember this experience like from 10 years ago,
mm,
listening to you on this corporation example. And also, I remember once, like maybe 20 years ago, in living in India, when I was invited to a death ceremony. And for me, that was such a learning experience and a transformative experience because I came into the room where the body was um, dressed like with clothes and flowers, and many musicians with instruments were playing and dancing around the body
mm,
with joy, full of joy. And all my mind was telling me, you need to be sad. This is someone dying. You need to be sad. And all my system was receiving the input full of joy. You need to dance. You need to dance and be happy. And
mm,
I was walking towards this situation, and somehow I felt my ego, my mind falling into pieces around. And I started like trying to dance and watch the transformation of sadness into joy.
mm,
And I think this is the cultural transformation needed for Western civilization, like that we believe that, for example, death is something sad. And I saw in India and also in Mexico that when someone dies, you are not sad because you lose someone. You're celebrating that life and how important and beautiful it was. And the whole shift of perspective for me was life changing. I relate with death and with the grief of death different today after
mm,
that moment. And it connects so much with what you were saying, like these two wings of
mm,
um of sorrow and of life force, and also how love and pain are together. When I
mm,
open my heart in vulnerability, love flows and our connection is deeper. Yeah, so that is another Western conditioning that I need to be strong and don't show my feelings. And then I'm so alone and it hurts. But when I show my feelings that it hurts, then we come together.
mm,
¿Cierto?
mm,
So I'm reflecting somehow what I feel so important that you have touched.
mm.
Um, and I don't know if there is something that resonates in you that you would like to share. Uh, and also maybe we could start moving into your work of the last years of healthy human culture that is so connected with grief tending
Mm.
and togetherness. So let me know where is your energy, heart, mind going into the
I'm going to
tea.
start, Anahi. I'm going to offer
Uh-huh.
this really simple little bit of ceremony of pouring
Uh-huh.
water for some of the things that you've shared, and honoring
Mm.
water as something that we put in the center. Um, so, yeah, blessings to this water. I'm going to offer it as a blessing to life. I'll pour it on some soil outside when we're finished. And for me, this can be just a really simple bit of ceremony that we add to our meetings, to our gatherings. Often people put candle in the middle, but how is it if we put fire and water? So both the kind of illumination, but also space for grief. And
Mm,
then, if something is touched, like I was touched by what you shared, somebody
mm,
just comes in and pours water and invites the water, to
mm,
honor and receive the feeling that is moving.
mhm,
So anyway, thank you. And I'm glad to include a bit of water in what we do.
mm,
I want to name two teachers. So Martine Prechtel is one of the people who's written beautiful things and taught beautiful ceremonies around grief from his experience in the Tutuhil people, the Guatemalan Mayan people, South America. Um, and this image of the two wings of the bird is from him. He says, in the house of love, there are two renters, praise and grief, praise and grief. So just putting all of them together, I think that's such a lovely image. Um, Yeah, and he's very clear. There's a book, The Smell of Rain on Dust is his book, that the countries that haven't grieved their atrocities and their mistakes will go on declaring war and continuing to make atrocities within their own borders and, sharing their atrocity. It's like until we grieve our pain, it's going to keep recycling through the system. And I see people like Resma Menachem also talking
mm,
about, dirty pain where we just blow it through each other.
mhm,
And when we tend it, it becomes this medicine. Okay. So the second
mhm,
bit of teaching, I just want to share because I think it's so helpful from Maladoma Somé from the Dagara in Burkina Faso. He said fire is the element that's out of control in the modern world, and we need water ceremonies to balance for them. Fire and
mm,
water. So
mhm,
action, 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 action leads to burnout. We need slow, tending,
mm,
feeling, head emotion. So anyway, just
mm,
inviting, let's put water in the center, attend to water, attend to feeling in our meetings as well. When
mm,
it's safe enough, when it's appropriate to do that. And I want to acknowledge the extent of the resistance and the attack that vulnerability and feelings can get in a culture where so here we are moving towards healthy human culture. One of the key insights of healthy human culture is that either we have cultural return paths, either we have spaces where painful things, ruptures, difficulty, shock, violence, losses, natural disasters, either we have spaces where we metabolize the fight, flight, freeze, emergency nervous system states through our bodies together, where we shake it out, where there's dancing, where there's rhythm, where there's holding space to cry and emote. Either we can discharge that and come back to a place of basic trust in
mm,
myself, trust in you, trust that together we can hold difficult things. We build resilience not by avoiding difficulty, but by finding our way through it and coming back to a place of trust. And when those return paths, when those social technologies of metabolizing difficulty don't exist, we end up being, I would say, organized by the management of that pain, which is often
mm,
held out of awareness. So, now culture shifts from being about tending relationships, keeping the web of relationships alive and healthy, including tending pain, keeping on coming back to our interdependence. Now we're being organized by a belief that we can't manage our pain, that there isn't the support that I need, that I can't manage. So now I'm in that culture of distracting, of trying to get enough power that I don't have to feel pain. You feel the vulnerability because I'm not going to, or I'm the
mm,
one that it's all being dumped on. All of your pain is coming into me, and all kinds of strategies, including probably putting money at the center of our political priorities, because that's more neutral than putting relationships when our relationships have so much historic pain or present pain in them. So now, we talk about the left and right hand side of the map. On the left hand side, we have return paths, trust is sustained. And then when the return paths fail, collectively, individually, we end up in a kind of survival state where life is difficult, we have to manage. And, good things can happen. There can still be trust and beauty and joy. But a lot of life is, I'm never going to be fully welcomed. I'm never going to fully belong. How can I make life bearable? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So these are some of the
Mhm.
insights of healthy
Mhm.
human culture, that trauma is
Mhm.
not just the shock, it's the failure of the return path. In
Mhm.
cultures with good technologies like, Sabonfo and Malodoma, in their village, they would have a grief ritual regularly. So they keep moving through difficulty, anger, pain,
Mhm.
frustration,
Mhm.
they irritate.
Mhm.
We can be irritating, can't we? Humans living with each other is
Mhm.
difficult. How can we keep that moving through as best as
Yeah.
possible without romanticizing, doing
See.
our best?
Yeah, I have heard myself saying in the last years, like, we human beings are the more challenging thing in regeneration world. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I have a question I want to bring before jumping into our last bits. That is, um, yeah, because somehow the last years, well, 2000 years, but the last 150 years, we humanity has done such much things, or maybe we are more aware of what we have done, um, that I sense in me and around the lack of trust in our humanity.
Mm.
And with this, the break of the community field, and individualism jumps immediately in with capitalism, and like this lack of hope that also Joanna Macy speaks, like, as we don't trust in each other, and I sometimes believe humanity is bad and is not caring. Um, how can I, or somehow I realize I'm grieving values in our way of I'm grieving that we care each other, and that I can trust in you, that you're going to take care of me even though I'm not present, because we take care of each other always. Like, I'm caring you, for me you matters. Like, um so is there something that comes to you, on how to grieve our desilusión, is in Spanish? I am
Disillusion.
decepcionada.
Yeah. Mm.
Mhm.
Uh, for me, add it, pour water, add it, put it in the mix.
Mm. Mm.
And I think, for some people that would be such a sign of insanity that we would not believe and trust the goodness of our own hearts. Like and I want to, I'm always with, and I use we, but which part of we? And for me, part of
Mm.
this, the healthy human culture map helps me to see, how survival structures which create these systems of harm are doing their best in already dysfunctional context,
Mhm.
and that there is, in most people, there's still the will to goodness, the care for the children, the longing to make better relationships than the harm we received. That's so central. And absolutely what I see when we create grief spaces is how much love comes into the room. Whoever the people are, it's not just that particularly loving people come to grief tending, but when you create the conditions, you know,
Mm.
for people to open their heart and bring vulnerability, actually we fall in love with each other again. And
Mm.
for me,
Mhm.
it's such a pattern, it's such a part of culture that is missing in the modern world, that we can end up with these brittle beliefs that, that we're not good, or that,
Mhm.
but if I think about the amount of, it's not in the news, it's not, but actually the number of kind, caring actions that are happening amongst billions of lives every day, all the time, or,
Mm.
it's
Mhm.
like, of course we're wired for empathy and love. We know that about our nervous systems. We know that we're wired. We're going to be short of time. So anyway,
Mhm.
thank you,
Yeah.
isn't it? And yes,
Mm. Mhm.
the,
Yeah.
the essential goodness of us. Yes.
Sí. And yeah, to close, querida, if you could share with us three practical ways to apply this. You have already said like um, then throwing the water into this cup and the fire, but these times that we are presencing the war in the screens every day, that we have gone through as as world through so much pain with the situations in Sudan, in Palestine, in so many places. How can we like bring these grief practices personally and as a group? um so love comes again, and I believe when what you just said, like that love that comes in that group is also arriving to the collective. So how
Mm,
can we make more spaces to grieving and opening our hearts? What
mm.
can you say to bring it to practical life, to daily life?
So that thing that I shared, I encourage us to invite water and to have really simple ceremony to acknowledge that even in a work meeting, when we're planning an event, that grief may be there. Um, in the inner transition work that I did when we were showing films or organizing events or discussions, to acknowledge just to speak, whoever's facilitating, to speak to the presence of grief as well as the presence of strength and motivation, to acknowledge that despair may also be here. So just to name, that this is part of the landscape of response when we tune into what's happening in our world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, there's such a vast network of Joanna Macy. The work that reconnects is an international global network, and I really encourage people to find out what is your regular grief practice. Is it on your own? Is it to spend time in nature, to ask forgiveness of the trees, to sit by some water? But maybe it is to go to a workshop. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's especially important for those people who are in positions of leadership to speak about how they're impacted, that they have grief, that they need support, because I think that image of the heroic leader that is invulnerable is a huge part of our problem. It's a huge part of our problem. A
Mm-hmm.
big bit of what we did in a transition here in Totnes was to put
Mm-hmm.
in support structures, that were all kinds of things, circles, work one to one, like, because we need that. And then the leaders that are getting that should be honoring that and speaking about that as a necessary part of doing this work. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving you your three things. So
Mm-hmm.
support for
Mm-hmm.
leaders and leaders who
Mm-hmm.
speak about their need for support, and that the damaging patterns are not just out there, they're also in here. I'm
Mm-hmm.
carrying the patterns of colonialism, patriarchy in myself, and I need to tend and look for those, and the grief of that and the harm that I've caused.
Mm-hmm.
Two, pour water. Bring water
Yes.
into simple ceremony. Honor it,
Mm-hmm.
love it, give it, let it flow. And then
Mm-hmm.
find spaces to tend grief, your own grief. And I think the absence of that is a huge contributor to burnout. Burnout is the pattern of untended pain being overridden. There's always a
Mm-hmm.
signal, and I drive through it, and I get more and more exhausted. So
Mm-hmm.
how are you listening for your own signals of pain? Physical,
Mm-hmm.
mental, emotional. Where do you notice those? Where do you get support to notice those? And
Mm-hmm.
how do you change something when you notice that you're going out of balance?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you,
I don't know.
Sophie. Thank you
Um,
so much. Yeah, thank you for your work. Thank you for your life. Thank you for all what you have been doing. Um, yeah, I want to honor you and your path, and I hope you find the best in your next steps. And happy to be together, connected in this web of caring and healing, and on always honoring you
um,
as one of the elders of the inner transition and the transition movement. Yeah,
Thank
thank you very
you.
much.
Bless you. Thank you, Anna. Here, good to be with you. And look up grief tending. Not
Mhm,
there's many people using that phrase now, tending grief. So yeah,
mhm.
I hope you'll
Mm-hmm.
find your spaces to be
Mm-hmm.
together in. Thank you for this,
Yeah,
Anna. It's an honor to be with
yeah.
you. Bless you.
See you. Big hug. And we're connected. I'm come to you soon. Besitos. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.